talk to
Just
me?
let me try, Michael.
Sarah.
Please. Well, if you have good reasons, would you mind if I...
Him or you?
Does it matter?
Yeah, it matters. What do you want to do?
We should keep...
The screen fades in from black to a white, almost real small town street, the kind of town where nothing ever seems to happen, where life moves slowly and predictably. Yet within this calm lies an undercurrent of tension, a foreboding of the begins to whisper before the first word is spoken, and then he appears, John Rambo, of a figure of conviction, hunted for forbidden able, silent yet commanding, a man whose eyes hold stories too heavy to voice. The camera linger on this rugged face, the withered line each to form battle fought abroad, and the silent wars begins within his mind. The opening scene immediately establishes the dichotomy, the gentle exterior of a quiet town colliding with a storm that has already been shaped by war, by loss, by the unhealed wound of a veteran returning home. This is not merely the story of action, it is a psychological study wrapped in the visceral tension of the survival. Rambo is more than a man. He is a sample of the displacement of alienations and the stress that exists between experience and understanding. The town people, polite yet wary, treat him as stranger, unaware the bent his calm, exteriorize a time over trauma and skill honored under circumstances most could never comprehend. The film immediately frames him as outsider, a figure whose presence challenges the country and the complacency of the small town. His silence is both a shield and a declaration. Every pause, every controlled movement speaks volume more than word ever could. This opening is cinematic in this restraint, using long takes, subtle sound design, and the beauty color a way to signal that tension is immense, that Rambo story unfold not just through conflict but through the invisible pressure of a mind. Essential for survival, the narrative quickly establishes the central tensions: a man shaped by war, unmoored in civilian life and society, incapable of understanding his experience. Sheriff results a figure of the authority and pride represent the obliviousness of order and protocols in the face of the true skills and the trauma. Their first interactions are disciplined, calm, but charged with the subtext. A simple question, a brief command, a misunderstanding, it is enough to ignite a chain of the event that will escalate in a profound struggle between the instinct of a veteran and the rigid expectations of law encompassment. The script does not rush into the action but instead builds a suspense with the meticulous care, ensuring that the audience feels the emotional stakes of the misunderstanding, fear, and the unhealed wounded. Long before the first gunshot is fired, as Rambo is provoked, the film reveals into the backstories with the subtle visual storytellings rather than the over expositions. Flashbacks, lingering glances, and the gesture hint a past filled with the battlefield capacity, capability, and the survival beyond what most is imagined. Even in this silence, Rambo communicates complexity. He is both predictor and a predator, capable of the violence yet restrained by the ethic and the hunted by sequences. The audience is drawn into the cinematic rhythm where tension and empathy context, where the physicality of the action in the inseparables from the emotional resources of the trauma. The duality sets the tone for the entire narrative, establishing a story that is a much about the human passage as it's about survival in extreme circumstances. With this opening, the film waves a thematic and a symbolic layer. The small town represent societal ignorance, microisms, and understandings and the fear that mirror the larger world failure to the commitment to the recognize the consequences of the war. The forest and the mountains surrounding the town are not merely setting but character in their own right, representing freedom, danger, and the unknown. The schematics assistance this duality, contrasting the flat, predictable architectures of the town with the wild, unlimited expanses of the nature where Rambo truly comes alive. The narrative is meticulous in its building, crafting, and environment where every tree's shadows and the echo carrying meanings, amplifying the both suspenses and the psychological depth. Easter eggs and the behind the scenes tribal subtly enrich the opening sequences. The war Rambo handles his gear, the precise attentions to postures and the movement and the deliberate fencing of the each interactions and the rounded in real military trainings, reflecting the filmmaker's commitment to the authorities for fans and casual viewers alike. These results provide texture and the realism, making Rambo's capabilities believable and the immersing the audience further into the narrative. Subtle notes the historical military conflict, including his veterans war experiences, hint a lot socio-political commentary framing the character not merely as an action hero but as vessels for exploring broader societal and the more world questions. Fan series emergently emerge naturally even in these earliest moments. Some interruption Rambo's silence is an manifestation of a post-trauma stress and stress a barrier between in experiences and the world unwilling of the comprehend them. Others suggest that his initial interactions with results foreshadows the moral quibbles he will face a test of the restraint and the survival that is as ethical as its physical. These interpretations deepens audience engagements, encouraging reflection on both character physiologicals and the thematics resonance while maintaining the thematic flow of the narratives by the conclusion of the opening sequences, tensions, and the being expertly establishes the audience is aware of the Rambo's capabilities, the street posed by the misunderstanding authority, and the moral stake that will govern by actions, even actions. Every lingering glances, every control gestures, every shadowed frame primes the viewers of the escalating series of the confrontations, psychological reckoings, and moral choices that will define the narratives. The introductions sets the understanding center of the immersive storytellings, blending actions, empathy, and the suspenses into the audience feeling and cinematic experience. As the first action closes, the tone is firmly set. This is a story of survival, morality, and the human sequences. Rambo is both hero and mirror, a man whose past has equipped him of extreme actions, whose consequences and the ethical will governed by the choices of the follows. The audience is left with the visual visceral awareness that every movement, every decision, and every interaction carries weight, and the journey the he will rest on not only the physical skill but very core of his humanity. The stage is set of the narrative that is immersive, emotionally charged, and the relentless. It is symmetric intensity. The forest lawns like a living, breathing intensity of the web bows. Trees sentinels, each restless of the leaves whispered warning. The transitions from the street trials calm of the town, the wild unpredictability of the nature in thematic poetry, a visual metaphor for the divided between a world that misunderstands him, the environment where his skill instinct, and the moral code of the life. Every step Rambo's take is deliberate, his senses and the hyper alert attended to the subtle shifts of the light, sounds, and movement. The camera follows the closely, capturing the precision of this movement, a taut readiness of the muscles, and the quiet intensity of his eyes. Her survival is not just physical, it is psychological, ethical, and the instigatives are delicate interplay of the reflex and consequences. As the authorities closes in, led by the sheriff results, the forest becomes a providing ground of the central conflict of the narratives, individuals, skills, and the moral awareness versus institutional authority, and the rigid misunderstandings, fizzles, movement, and the clumsy reactives, and the increasingly disparate, creating a tension that almost caliphate. Each technical errors, each shouted commands, and each miscalculated persuaded construct sharply with the Rambo's fluid adaptively ability, reinforcing the thematic score that the brute forces and the pride cannot match experiences, intelligence, and the ethical resistance. Evidence is drawn into these escalating games of the predictor and prey, aware that the every missteps could have devastating consequences. Rambo's tragic crisis unfold with the meticulous care. Each actions are combinations of the instincts, strategical trainings, and the moral calculation. He lays trap the precisions not out of the malice but necessity, demonstrating the awareness of the consequences that evaluate the narrative beyond. Until action sequences, the camera captures the impact of the many yours the subtle displacement of the earth, the tension in his postures, and the fleeting glimpses of the emotions when he is composed exteriors. The sequence are the and restraint and cohesion, emphasizing the Rambo's genius lies not only in his combat skills but in his ability to navigate ethical and psychological complexity under extreme pressure. Short distant presence provides a moral and psychological counterpoint. He observes, advises, and occasionally influences a voice of the reason and empathy is a landscapes dominated by fear and a misunderstanding. Their relationship adds a layer of depth. Rambo is not merely a solitary serviceland, but a man shaped by the mentorship, loyalty, and the enduring consequences of the war. Trotman's subtle guidance underscores the stakes of the moral decisions making, reminding, and the evidence that survival in the interspersed will from ethical responsibility. This movement of interactions are quiet yet emotionally charged, blending seamlessly into the rhythm of the senses and strategy. The forest sequences are rich with the visual and the symbol languages, fallen trees, tangled undergrowth, and the shifting shadows mirror Rambo's internal state, reflecting both the trauma he carries and the moral tightropes he walks. The interplay of the light and shadows combined with the dynamic camera's angles immerses the audience in perspectives, creating tension and empathy simultaneously. The even the sounds of the forest, the snaps of the swings, the whisper of the wind, the distant echo of the human voices become instruments of the suspenses, heightening awareness of the both danger and consequences. The environment is not mere backdrop, it is a character shaping and reflecting the narrative and Rambo's psychological journey. Subtle details and Easter eggs enrich these sequences. Rambo's precise handling of the weapons, the efficiency of their traps, and the use of natural terrain reveal the depth of these trainings and the enduring impact of the past missions. These elements reward attentive viewers and the authorities, emphasizing that the survival is rooted in skill, experience, and psychological equity brings the acuity rather than cinematic exaggerations behind the scenes insights such as the careful choreography of the stunt and technical realisms amplify the immersive quality, demonstrating the filmmaker's commitment to the both narratives and the visual authority. Fan interpretations naturally arises in these early forest encounters. Some viewers Rambo's movement as a reflection of the post-traumatic stress and manifestations of the hypervigilance of the experience few can comprehend. Others interpret this ethical restraint in lying traps and the navigating threats as an allegory of the moral complexities faced by the veterans reintegrity into a world that cannot understand their experiences. Their lawyer of meanings deepens audience engagements, inviting reflection on the both psychological and social dimensions while maintaining the momentum of the suspenseful narratives of storytelling. The designing reasoning tension is heightened by the relentless period and the unpredictable of the forest itself. Rambo's keen observation, rapid adaptations, and the moral deliberations of the ducks opposed against the noises, confusion, and the impatience of the Tassel's forces. Every rustle, every missteps, every shadows is amplified into the movement of the suspenses, forcing at the audience to inhabit Rambo's heightened awareness. The forest becomes both suspensefully and the crucible, stressing physical skills, ethical judgment, and the psychological endurance of the simulatless. Simultaneously, by the close of these sections, the narrative has firmly established by the dual axis the physical struggle of the survival and the moral psychological navigation of the sequences. Rambo is no longer merely a man on the run. He is forces of the nature shaped by the experience, constrained by the ethics, and defined by the interplay between trauma, skills, and consequences. The stage is the set of the escalating conflict, the ethical dilemmas of the survivors, and the profound personal stakes that will carry through the remainder of the story. The first clash of this pressure and put with a sudden, almost shocking intensity, shattering of the forest descriptive calm, bolstered pierced through the canopy of trees, while the echo of the shouted commands bounces through the dense undergrowth. Rambo's move with the predicted precision, every action measured, every motion deliberate, a sympathy of the instinct, training, and the moral calculations. He is aware of this power, but restrains of his expression, choosing each interactions not out of the malice of the vegans, but necessity. The cinematography captured both the chaos of this assault and the controlled grace of the Rambo's response, framing him as both small in the scales yet overwhelming mighty, the most in the presence. A man who exists in perfect harmony with his environment while simultaneously lethal danger. The forest itself a participant in the tension, each branches, shadows, and the uneven terrain features becoming of the tool of the potential hazard. Rambo uses natural cover, manipulate the landscapes, and sets traps with surgical precision, transforming every element of the environment into the extensions of this strategy. The audience is drawn into his pervasive experiencing each heartbeat, each calculation, and each ethical decision as if were their own. The film's sound and design amplifies in his emotions the snaps of a twings, the soft hiss of the leaves underfoot, and the distant strategy of the gunfire combine into the sensory experience that mirror the heightened awareness of the man for survival is both physical and moral exercise. Sheriff Diesel's expressions escalate rapidly, his authority fragiles, even his calm circumstances begin to crumble under the weight of the Rambo's unrelenting skills. Every failed manifests every method of the training and the every impulsive decision, highlighting the stark contrasts between Berotic's rigidity and the intensive mastery. Rivals become both antagonists and the cautionary fighting are representations of the institution's pride, social misunderstanding, and the its consequences and the underestimating and the individual oriented by the conflict. The tensions between these two fires is both visceral and psychological link and the groundwork of the ethical and the strategic confrontations that the delineate of the remainder of the narrative. Both first direct confrontations with the divinity in politics of his complex moral code, a man is unpredictable, not for the retributions, but the neutralize treat the cameras linger on the Rambo's expression grim focused, yet pain reflecting an acute awareness of the sequences. This is a man of understands the waiting of every actions and the ripples effect of the create. The scenes illustrates our core themes, the difference between the violence born in necessity and violence born in impulses. In Rambo, physical superiority is tempered by a consequences that refuses are abandoned. Ethical consequences even under extreme doses, creating a tension that is both narratives and physical. Trotman distance guidance is woven so seamlessly into the unfolding actions. His calm, athletic voices provide both strategy and the moral preserving, reinforcing the dual nature of the conflict. It is as much about the pursuit of ethical integrity as it is about physical survival. The interactions throughout minimals a dialogue are rich in subtext, revealing the depth of their relationship and the ongoing negotiations between loyalty, mentorships, and the individual consequences. Trotman serve as a reminder of the Rambo's journey is assured in moral complexity and the every decision carries weight beyond immediate survival. The Rambo Ploys are the cinematic lesson in case and consequences. Each near pitfall and deviance is carefully constructed in the maximize efficiency while minimizing the unnecessary harm, reinforcing his ethical restraints. Yet consequences of the survival and unavoidable injuries occurs, chaos, insurance, and the inscience and the Rambo is forced by the navigate emotional and psychological fault. There, this balance of the action and reflection distinguish the sequence from conventional actions and trophies, transforming that the would be spectacle into the mediations on the trauma, responsibility, and human consequences. The items fill both the thrill and the moral weight seamlessly. Symbolism meters. Every movement, the twisted branches, displaced soils, and the distributed wildlife mirror the factorings of Rambo's internal world, while the interplay of light and the shadows reflect the ethical he negotiated with every decision. The forest become an external manifestation of the integral struggles, empathizing that the conflict is much psychological as it's physical. Each action, each traps, each calculated passage resonate the multiple levels, embedding narratives, character, and the thematics depth with it. The cinematic experience, subtle behind the scene details, enrich these confrontations. Observant viewers may notice the precise military techniques employed, the realizes handling with the weapons, and the authority of technical decision making. These choices are grounded in research and constructions, lending the narrative's credibility while enhancing emotions. Small Easter eggs, markers on the trees, prior placements, or Rambo manipulations of the terrain reward attentive audience and the reinforces for depth as a character of the shaped by experiences, training, and the traumas. The tension escalate further. A Rambo forces adopt attempting new strategies at contiguously under schematics. His skill and awareness, each failed attempt reinforces by the thematical scores, experiences, intelligence, and ethical awareness cannot be supplemented by the brute forces of institutional authority. The narrative manipulations are delicate balance between action, suspense, and the psychological explorations ensuring that the audience remains fully invested not just in survivals but in the moral calculations. Every decision. Section 3 closed with the Rambo retreating deeper into the forest, a figure of the control, power, and quiet morality authority. He is physically and psychologically attended into the every elements around him, ethically committed to restraint and unfeelingly prepared to act when necessity. The audience is left immersed into the world where survival consequences and conscience interest and for the escalating conservations and the thematics explorations that will define the next stage of the story. The tension shift from the forest, the town, the space, the ad feels disrespectfully saved by the beacons of fuels of the Rambo's moral and the strategic decisions. The streets lined with familial the streets lined with familiar facades and the remnant of the every life are suddenly transferred into the an arena of the chaos consequence. Rambo moves with the same precision and awareness that defined his forest survivals, yet the stakes fundamentally different here. Civilizations of the present collateral damage carries a human weight, and every action is fraught with the ethical complexity. The cinematography captured the duality, juxtaposing wide shores of the deserted streets with the intermediate close-ups, the Rambo stances expressions, reminding the audience that the navigate not only the physical danger but moral perils. First consideration with the town authorities in these stances and immediate sheriff results emboldened yet increasingly unhindered attempt to the assert control to the situation he no longer fully understands. His commanded are to live his movements despite and every field maneuver exposes the limitations of the rigid authority in the experience and instinct. Rambo is construct, operates, and the disciplined calm, turning the environment of his advantages while remaining actually aware of the potential from the harm innocent. Each interaction, each calculated pauses become a study in ethical decision making under pressure reinforces the normative expressions of the restraint, responsibility, and the consequences. The film uses the urban chaos, the heightened suspense, and the psychological tension, broken windows, under turned vehicles, and the derelict streets are not merely prop the symbolic extensions of the conflict, mirroring Rambo's internal turmoils and the societal distortions caused by the misunderstanding and fear. The audience feels the weight of the each decision. Should he engage, await, or create diversions? Every move carries both strategic and moral implications, and the camera linger on the mint details of the navigations, the placement of the handle, the careful steps around the fragile structures, and the observation of the civilians, immersing viewers in his ethical scholars. Rambo's first major practical maneuvers with the town is both brilliant and restrained. He uses rooftop, alleyways, and the shadows. The disorient and the outmaneuvers his pressure without the resorting and the unnecessary violence. The sequence empathizes his mastery, the spectacle awareness, strategic thinking, and the ethical restraint, restraining, presenting action that is as cerebral as its visceral. When confrontation result is injury, the film lingers are Rambo's reactions, operating clash of the regard, the careful assessment of the consequences, the decision of the continue with measured precision. This is the man understands is the victory is meaningless without the moral integrity taught man. Parents continue to provide an ethical ensures his decent instructions, empathizes, questions, and the restraint and the observation, reinforcing the distinctions between the action driven by the survival versus action driven by the impulses of the quiet. Their interactions highlights the metaphor dynamic and the deepen audience understanding of the Rambo's internal moral compass. Trotman represent reasons and the societal insight, offering a counterpoint the chose while encouraging the harsh realities of the Rambo skills and experiences. The dialogue spares but weighted in its thematics in its restraint, underscoring the film thematics commitment of the ethical tensions. The consequences of the escalating conflict within the town are immediate and the unavoidable. Civilians react with the fear, confusion, and the heavy unfolding. The authorities' repeated failure accelerated chaos and the danger. Rambo's action toward the careful calculated have ripple effects, forcing both him and the evidence of the comfort, the complex interplay between the survival morality and the unintended consequences. The narrative maintains suspense while the deepening emotion resources, demonstrating that the ethical decisions making as a critical and the tactical skill in the life or death scenario. Visual symbolism is a heavily employed throughout these sequences. This the juxtaposed or the broken straw front against Rambo's calm, deliberate movement mirrors the duality of the destruction and the control. Shadows stretch across the streets, the light extensions of his moral and psychological struggle, and the interplay of the light and the adjectives empathizes of the contracts between social rigidity and the adaptive skill. Every frame communities tension consequences and the ethical reflection, ensuring that the action sequences are not merely spectacles but narrative and thematic vehicles and Easter eggs and the subtle narrative cues enrich to the town sequences for attentive viewers. Rambo's navigations of the urban environment reflect not only his military training but also pure experience into throughout the film. The placement of the objects, the utilizations of the natural covers, the even section of road Ness demonstrate layered realisms, reinforcing for the authority of these skills and the calculator of the nature of the ethical restraint. The details reward careful observation while deepening audience engagement and emotion. And interpretations naturally emerge from the events man preserve Rambo's urban navigations of the allegory of for the veteran struggles and the reconcile survival instinct with the social expectations, highlighting the broader themes of the alienation, misunderstanding, the moral responsibility, otherwise view the town of the microcosms of the social failure, the where pride, ignorance, and the rigid authority collide with the individual skill and the ethical awareness. These layers enrich the narrative, allowing to the intellectual reflection while preserving suspense, action, and thematic engagements. And section 4 closes with the Rambo moving through the outskirts of the two silhouetted against the backdrop of the smoke delivers the distinct serious. He is physically vigilant, morality resolute, and the psychological attended. A man whose survival is intertwined with the ethical responsibility, the narrative, his escalated stakes, dependent character complexity, and the hidden suspenses, setting the stage of the increasingly intensive confrontation, psychological recooking of the moral dilemmas that will define the next phase of the story. Aftermath of the town confrontations, leaves of the landscapes marked by the chaos, tension, and the interdeliberate imprint of the human fear. Streets once quite now the scare of the pursuit, overturned vehicles, shattered windows, and the red scattered like the remnant of the fractured authority. Rambo moves through the alternated environment with the same deliberate precision as the display in the forest, yet this awareness of the extended beyond physical survival of the moral weight of the consequences. Each steps, each careful observations of the civil and surrounding reflect of the burden responsibility carries the camera lingering of these details, emphasizing that survival is Rambo world inseparable from ethical calculation that very victory carries the potentials untalent harm. That true mastery is as much about restraint as it's about skills. As he retrains into the shadowed outlook, the psychological demonstrations of the journey become apparent. Memories of the past battles and capability services is the flatting flashes, creating the almost unbearable tensions between presentations and the lingering trauma. Rambo's breathing is mired glances, the subtle tensions in his handled all communicate a mind operating at the edge of the human endurance. The audience is drawn into the internal struggles, experiencing not only the immediate danger of the pursuit, but also the emotion and the moral of the man conditional to survive under the extreme circumstances. The dual narrative external treat the internal recalking establishes of the rhythm of tension and the interperception that will persist throughout of the story. The authorities, particularly Sheriff Teasers, respond with increasing desperation and the reckless each failed attempt to the capture Rambo's implies for the narrative tensions of the thematic construct between vivid institutional authority and the adaptive morality consequences will teaser's pride of the pair will lend him to the niceness of Rambo's capabilities, illustrating the consequences of misunderstanding the spirit of the ego-driven leadership. The film portrays these failures not merely is not plot devices but as a lesson authority without insight of the restraint inherently flagged, particularly when the confront with the complex principal individual of the operative outside is the narrative framework. Rambo's technical genius is opposed with the deep ethical awareness in these sequences. Manipulations of the environment is a way it captures setting revisions and the using natural cover to the mislead of the pursuers. Each action of the calculated neutralize treats as minimizing harm, a restriction that reinforces his moral code and the separate him from conventional action arrays driven from the vanguard of the Veda systematic Ropi empathizes his interplay between action and morality, using long tracking shoots and the tight close-ups of the immersive viewers in this both technical brilliance of the medicines and the psychological deliberations unwillingly each choice. Thought presents and continue to provide emotional and ethical grounding, though so leisurely observing with the distance, his guidance reinforces for the principles and govern Rambo's decisions, the importance of the restraint, the weight of consequences, and the moral responsibilities that accompanies the extraordinary skills their Spears dialogues conveys volumes, understanding the depth of their bound and the mentorships of the dynamic, the shapes, both strategy and consequence. Trotman service as a narrative ensure, reminding the audience of the Rabo's brilliance in the intersect from the ethical framework and that the story's tensions is a moral as a physical visual symbolism reinforces for the emotional and ethical weight of these sequences broken streets scattered debris and the displaced object mirror and both fractured faces which the play of the light and shadows across the urban ruins reflect the duality of these existences capable of the immersive violence restrained by the consequences by the survival navigating moral imperative of the complex as the trains itself. The cameras captured this contract with deliberate compositions, allowing the audience to experience the environment, both the physical challenges and as a reflection of the psychological and ethical struggle. Subtle narrative and the production details enrich in the scenes for the attentive viewers. Rambo's careful navigations of the obstacles, his use of the natural covers of the efficiency of his movement reflect realistic tacticals running while Easter eggs of the environment hint for the broader experience. Literary history and psychological conditioning, these elements provide texture, authority, and the consequently ensuring that the Rambo skills grounded in the reality rather the exaggerated spectacles and the enhancing the immersive quality of the narrative without interpreting the story pacing. The interpretations gradually emerged in the wake of these events. Some see Rambo's actions as a metaphor of the post-war veteran struggles of the range straight into the society, balancing survival instinct with the ethical and social expectations. Other interpret to the town and the symbol a reflection of the social failure, a place where fear, pride, and misunderstanding collide with the individual moral clarity and skills. These layer of the meanings deepen of the audience engagement, encouraging reflection of the psychological, ethical, and social themes of the maintaining the immediately and the suspense of the narrative. The tension begins to shift for the external pursuit to the internal reckoning as Rambo moves to the surrounding forest and mountains. The sequences of the town event with heavily upon with. He contemplates both the physical and moral ramifications of his actions, aware that each choice carries reverberations beyond immediate survival. The pacing slows momently, allowing the audience inhabited psychological space and the experience of the profound interplay between trauma, skill, and moral awareness that defines his character. Section 5 closes with the Rambo pausing on a ridge overlooking to the aftermath of the confrontation stretching below him. His physical alert, morality consequence, and the psychological burnout a figure whose survival in the inseparable from the ethical deliberation. The stage is set of the escalations of the pursuit strategy and the confrontation with the narrative fully immersed in the interplay between external moral complexity and the psychological stakes that drive the story forward. The forest deepens into the lengthened shadows of the shifting light as the Rambo retreats further from the town, moving with the precision that transforms every trees, rock, and the fallen branches into the both tool and shield. Here, the environment is no longer passive, it becomes the living extensions of the mind, the place where skills, instinct, and the moral ambitions converges. Every football is calculated, every glance is measured as the navigated the dense undergrowth, anticipating the approach of his posture while considering the ethical weight of every action. The thematic centuries in the intimate connections glittering on the tension in his hands, the narrow focus his eyes, and the subtle interplay between shadows and movement that allows him dominate to the Tyrians without unnecessary violence. Rambo's traps are set with surgical precision, each one reflections on his trainings, experience, and ethical restraint. Sheer lines, concealed pitfalls, and the diversions and carefully placed to the anticipate rather than kill wherever possible are testament to his deepness awareness of consequences. The audience is drawn into the meticulous choreography, understanding that every trap is simultaneously of a tactical decision and the moral statement. Survival must be achievement without unnecessary cruelty, and skill is measured is not only by effectiveness but restrain the sequences pulses with the suspenses the forest itself, amplifying every sound, the snap of the speak, the distant call about the shifting leaves as if the world is itself thought its place. The tension escalates as the sheriff results and the distributes of advances and the decorations growing with the each field maneuvers, helicopters circle overhead, shuri fields and the raised and the constructions manifest of the reckless actions, the conflict between their chows and the Rambo's disciplined approach is strict and the thematically rich, illustrating the danger of the pride, ignorance, and the rigid authority. Each missteps of the picture heightens suspense with the reinforcing of the narrative moral subtext. Brute forces without the understanding is indicates the ethical restraint in the face. Projections of the both is rare and powerful. The audience is placed with the state of the immersive anticipation, feeling every manipulations, every danger, and every ethical tensions. Amid pursuit, Rambo demonstrates not only a physical prowess but psychological acuity. He predicts movement, manipulates the perceptions, and uses the environment of the mislead and neutralize threats. Each sequence is filmed with a dynamic interplay with the wide shots to closes ups, emphasizing both the scope of the terrain and the intimacy of his calculated images. The forest is a crucial testing his endured skills and the ethical fortitude, while the camera ensures that the viewers experience the agility of his struggles. Survival is both body and consequences. Shortman consequences presence thought that the strength continue to provide guns and the moral groundings. He calls Mayard voices remind Rambos and the ardence of the importance of the resist aware and the ethical actions here. Connections underscores the scenes of the reality mentorships and the responsibility treatment service of both observance and the consequences, highlighting the tension between action and consequences that defines Rambo's journey. The novelty waves the guidance naturally into the sequences, enhancing the character depth without the interpreting of systematic flows of suspense and actions. Symbolism centrate the forest sequences, the interplay of the light and shadow mirror the ethical and psychological ambiguities Rambo navigates. Parent branches distributed art and displays wildness reflect the consequences, the fragility of life and the weight of the moral decisions. The cameras linger on these details, transforming the environment into the novelty factors that reflect both external danger and internal struggles. Each manifests, each traps, and the each silent observation carries layered meanings, reinforcing the psychological and ethical dimension of the story. Subtle behind the scenes details and the Easter eggs and the embedded in these sequences. Rambo's textiles reflect realistic military trainings, while small environment cues into previous experience and the expertise observations. Observant viewers can note the precision of his movement, the strategic use of the natural cover, and the psychological manipulation of his postures. The element enrich the narratives with texture and authority, making the story immersive while demonstrating the filmmaker meticulous attention to the realism and complexity. Fan interpretation naturally arises during these sequences. Some see the forest and metaphor, the Rambo's mind tense, unpredictables, and the scared by the past traumas, where instinct and the ethical judgment most occasionally to navigate unseen street. Others view his traps and the merchants are moral complexity under pressure, skill without consequences. His follows and the restraint is ultimate demonstrations of mastery. The layer of the interpretations depends engagement, blending intuitions, reflections with the immediate thrill of the survival and suspenses. Tension reaches a fever pitch around to anticipate the next wave of pursuit. Every movement is both strategic and ethical, a careful negotiations between instinct, skill, and consequences. The forest pulses with suspenses, the ordinary and visual details amplifying danger with imposing our items is Rambo's heightened awareness. Each branch, shadows, and the distant sounds carries the tendrils, trees, forcing the woodwards to habitate the same door, sharp mental state as the protagonist. Sanction 6 closes with the Rambo poised atop a ridge overlooking the forest and the advantages forces below. He is physically collide, psychological, focused, morally resolute, embodying the interactions of the skills, consequences, and survival. The narrative has escalations, tensions, showcased, and mercy is dependent, and the ethical psychological stakes, setting the stages for the reckoning that the will define the next section of the story. The forest become a crucial balls of tensions, and the Rambo's purchases causes in their dispersions escalating with the each failed attempt to appear with in every restaurant's police, every distant shout, every glint of the metals on the store's forest floor becomes simplified on his awareness, a sympathy of the treat and the consequences of the only he can interpret with the precision. Rambo's movement to the flourish and the economicals, each step's calculate, each actions measured, blending mystic skills and the moral deliberations into a seamless performance of the survival. The cinematography they capture both the scope of the forest and the intimacy of the perspective, driving the audience into the high-end perception perceptions of the man whose sons have been honored by the war trauma and the experience beyond civilization of comparisons. Rambo's struggle experience reaches new heights and he began to manipulate the environment itself, turning trees, rock and natural covers into the tool strategy. Straps and deployed with the meticulous care, shear lines, painful and the delineous traits without unnecessary harms and reflection of the ethical form. Work even under extreme pressure, the audience feels both the suspense and admirations, understanding that this skill is not barely physical but a complex combination of height, knowledge of the woman behavior, and the moral judgment. Each sequences underscores the central themes of the narrative's powers and capabilities of the inspirables from the responsibility and consequences. Sheriff results dispersion speaks during the phases of the pursuit, each strategical's errors, compounds of the fear and frustrations driving him toward increasingly recklessness of the decisions and narrative frames results as both antagonist figures and representation of authority untempered by the understanding pride unchecked of the experience. The contrast between his reactive chaos and the Rambo controlled precision is stark, highlighting suspense while the reinforcing of the thematic core of the story, skill and restraint of the spear to the raw force and the unhacked egos. Every field maneuvers by the postures amplifies narrative tensions and the deepens of the ethical stakes. A critical turning points of the occurs when Rambo uses the forest to isolate the postures, forcing them to tram the neutralize their immediate threat while preserving life whenever possible. The audience witness the tension between the lethal Chancellor Orochi's moral restraint, the dynamic that drives the suspense and the character development. Rogers ups his calculated expressions of cold focus to his eyes and deliberate the passing of each environment movements underscore the psychological intensity of these sequences. Here the narrative emphasizes that the Rambo's true mastery lies not only the survival but in the ethical judgment under pressure. Shortman, distant guidance continue to shape the narrative. His wise, calm and measured provide the strategy of the moral perspective, reminding the Rambos and the items of the ethical boundaries that the governs his actions, their intermittent Dialogues highlight morality, relationships, and the ethical grounding reinforces of the navigate narrative duels focus on the physical and moral navigations. These moments add emotional depth and the consequences, ensuring that the Rambo's brilliance is perceived not as unchecked violence but the disciplined conscious and the authority informed action. The forest sequence are rich in symbolisms, twists, branches, displaced earth, and the subtle traces wildlife echo in the internal conflict within Rambo's, reflecting both the scales of the past traumas and the weight of his ethical choices. Light filtering through the compass craft patterns at the mirror moral alienability, framing as his figure consequently negotiating the line between necessity, actions, and retirement. Every trap manifests and the pause infused into the layered meanings, creating a cinematic tapestry where physical, psychological, and the ethical demonstrative of the inseparably interwanted subtitles behind the scenes details enhance the realism of the sequence. Rambo's handling the weapon's precise use of the cover and the technical awareness of reflect metabolisms research and the conclusions with military experts. Easter eggs in the forest make marks on the trees previously disturbed foliage and the strategic placement of the traps reward attention viewer of the reinforcing narrative consistency. These elements lend authenticity to the capabilities, ensuring that the audience perceives his skills as the experiences, training, and the psychological equity rather than the cinematic executions. Fan interpretations enrich the tension and the thematic complexity. Some viewer embose manifests as the allegory of the veteran struggles and the recalling instinctive survival mechanisms with the societal moral expectations highlighting generations, traumas and the ethical responsibility. Others interpret the forest itself as a living extension of the mind and the space where dangerous memories and morality instructs. These readings deepens audience engagement, allowing these sequences of the function simultaneously as a thrilling action, psychological exploration, and the ethical reflections. Rising tensions culminates as the Rambo anticipations anticipates some next ways to pursue using both foresight and moral judgment to the maintain control, the forest becomes a stage for escalating suspenses. Every sound of the shadows amplified, the every action stated with the consequences. The audience is immersed by the narrative where the physical survival, psychological security, and the ethical restraint coexist, creating a manifest tension that drives the stories toward its first major turning point. Section 7 closes with the Rambo's pursuit atop to the high ridge, surveying the forest below. Trap sets up shows acknowledgement. He is physically prepared, morally resolute, and psychologically focused. A man whose skills, restraint, and the awareness have elevated him above survival, the narrative, and the escalated to a point where strategy, morality, and the psychological tension instruct, setting the stage for the increasingly critical confrontations, character revelations, and the thematic exploration in the following section. After the first wave of the confrontation, the forest first and the tension remains thick in the air, a living reminder of the both immediate danger and the past trauma. Rambo moves with a deliberate prudence, each steps weighted with the awareness, each within negotiations between survival instinct and the ethical restraint. The canopy filters the sunlight into the fractured patterns on the forest floor, mirroring the fractured state of his mind, memories of the past, battles capacity, flickers of the brief, almost impositive glimpse, blending seamlessly with the present traits. The cinematography empathizes reality, alternating between wide, sweeping shots at the capture overclaiming scale of the nature and the tight close-ups of the conveys a montage of thought, observation, and psychological calculation. In this sequence, the forest become more than the battleground. It is reflective spaces, a mirror of the Rambo's internal struggles, fallen branches twisted underground, and the uneven terrain evoke the scares of the past traumas and the moral complexity of the every decision of the make, even as he sets traps protect himself. His actions are carefully measured, blessing the imperative of the survival with the presentation of life whenever possible. The audience is drawn into the intricacies of interplay, experiencing suspenses not slowly from the external streets but from the psychological and the ethical weights each decision carries. Rambo's restraint underscores the central themes. True mystery is defined not by the exercise of powers but the judicious and the conscious applications of the skills. Sheriff Diesel forces continue to the navigate of forest with increasing dispersions, unaware of calculated intelligence guarding Rambo's movements. Their repeated failure are the amplified overconfidence, misdirections, and the lack of adaptability, constructing the sharply of the Rambo's measured, informed approach. Every misstep of the service, both narratives and thematic purposes, reinforcing of the dangers of underestimating and the trained principal individual's attention is almost tangible and ardent sketch between fear of the purposes, pursues, safety and away at Rambo's calculated precision. Stormer voices appear intermediately and a grounding influence, bridging the psychological and ethical dimensions of the sequences. His calls guidance reinforces the narrative central morals framework. Survival is inseparable for the ethical awareness and the every choices carries where the spear's meaningful exchanges deepens audience understanding of the Rambo's motivation, highlighting loyalty, mentorships, and the moral reflection of the critical component of his character. The forest sequences thus become a clear narrative convinces blending actions, introspections, and the moral philosophy without the breaking of the immersive cinematic flow. Tourism is carefully woven into the environment, shots of the light breaking through the canopy symbolize clarities, consequences, and insight in the midst of the shadows of trauma and ethical ambiguity, fallen, logged, and distributed undergoes reflect both the external consequences of conflict and the internal scares Rambo carries. Even the sound design rustling leaves distinct calls of wildlife. The echo of snapping branches serves as a narrative devices tensions while simultaneously reinforces for the forest of the extensions. Rambo's every sensory details reinforces for the dual narratives of external survival, internal recording subcalls behind the scenes details enhances the authority of these sequences, Rambo's careful handle the trains, the precision of his tram placement, and his manipulation of natural covers reflect realizes military tactics. Small Easter eggs, such as the faint traces of the pure manufactures of hills, calculated uses of the forest landmarks, reward attentive viewers and deepen emotions. These details underscore the filmmaker's commitment to realism and narrative continuity, usually ensuring that the Rambo's extraordinary capabilities feel grounded in the both experience and the strategic intelligence rather than symmetric exertions and interventions flourish in these reflective forests. Passengers passages many view of the forest as a metaphor of the verbose mind, dense, unpredictable, scared the past traumas yet navigatable skills, experience, and moral awareness. Otherwise, others interpret of careful movement and restraint and allegories of the ethical complexities faced and the veterans' reign tragedy into the society that misunderstand that experiences these layers add depth, encouraging viewers to the engaging with the psychological and moral themes while remaining captivated by the tensions and the thematic spectacle. The reasoning tension in these sections, both internal and external, Rambos anticipated the movement of these pastors while negotiating with the own for mass moral responsibility and the consequences for cruel actions. The forest amplifies subdued tensions, turning every versus shadows and the shifting light into the moment of the potential danger and the ethical reflection. The fencing blends suspenses with the introspections, ensuring the evidence experience the narrative only the series of the street's physical survival, but the profound of exploration, consequences, skill, and psychological endurance. Section 8 closes with the Rambo posturing atop a moss convert which survive the chorus. A shadow, Ethan and the whispers through the trees. He is figure of the mystery introspections and the moral revelations similarity attended by the physical threat and consequences, ethical consequences. The narrative has depended in the psychological, thematic, and the semantic complexity, preparing the audience for the reasoning tensions, ethical dilemmas, and the decisive confrontations that will define the context of the story in the next sections. The forest pulses with tension and the pursuit reaches the pivot which every shadow's potential fears, every sound amplified by the anticipations. Wambo moves with the lethal precision, his body and the mind operating in perfect Sanctions navigating traps, obstacles, and the unpredictable movement of the postures. Each trap is navigations between strict strategy and the ethical constructions. The cinematography alternative between wide that showcase the sheer scope of the wilderness and the intimate close-ups of the Rambo short, focused expressions, drawing the audience deep into the heightened precisions. This is a man who is transformed survival into the art form, but that is always tempered by the moral restraint and psychological insight as the pursuit escalates. Sheriff Diesel's dispersions become parodied, his authority android repeated failure transforms into the reckless obsessions every measured judgment mean hours, every impulsive order and every lancing is conclusion highlight the thematic contrasts between rigid institutions, power, and the evident morality consequences. Thus, the audience feel the mounting tension in every shot as the stakes rise not only a physical survival but for the ethical and psychological outcome of each encounter. The chase is no longer just a test of skill, it is a collision of the moral framework contrasting pride and the ego with experience, restraint, and consequence. Rambo's first major turning point in this phase occurs when the leaders of a group is deputies into the carefully orchestrated trap. The sequence is cinematic in its precision, sneer lines, tighten diversions, mislead, and the natural abstract in the manipulated incapacities without facility whenever possible. Close-ups capture micro expressions, the slight tensions in Rambo's jaws, the controlled narrowing of his eyes, the fleeting shadows of regret, empathizing that the even moment of tactical superiority he carries the physiologicals and the moral weight of the consequences. The movement underscores the film's central powers is meaningful only when exercised with the ethical awareness remains at the yet critical presence, guiding Ramos through both the strategic and the moral dimensions of the escalating conflict. His intermediate voices provides contracts, controls, and reassurance, reinforcing narrative duos focus on the survival and consequences. These iterations highlight reality, mentorships, and the ethical parameters of that govern Rambo's choices, ensuring that the brilliance of the framed not unchecked violence but the disciplined, principled actions. The evidence is remained that the Rambo genius inseparable from this small environmental symbolisms reaches its peak during these and once the dense forest fractured with light glittering throat can pay the judgment of the Tarian reflects in the intersection of the internal struggling and the external trains, fallen countries, distributed undergrowth, and the displaced wildlife mirror the consequences of the conflict and the ethical dilemmas Rambo's by must navigate with the each decisions. Every movement, every pause, every sound resonate with the layered meaning, blending suspenses, moral reflection, and the psychological intensity. The forest itself becomes a living character, shaping and reflecting the narrative as Rambo moves toward the climax. Behind the scene and craftsmanship woven seamlessly into these sequences, Rambo tacticals reflect genius military strategy and environmental awareness, while subtle cues, period marking on trees, tacticals fostering, and the stage diversions reward attentive viewers and the reinforce narrate continuity. These choices heighten realisms without the dancing form, cinematic dramas demonstrating of filmmakers' dedications of the authority, emissions, and the layered storyline retellings. Every element serves both suspense and the narrative integrity, making them both ultimate triumphs credibles, compelling, and the morality certification as the confrontations reaches his revelations. Rambo's exits final act of the restraint and ethical authority. Rather than exiting revenge, he teases and the remaining deputies of the Windrows humbled a narrative choice that elevates his character beyond mere actions heroism into the study of the moral psychological mastery. The forest, now guided by still resonant with the echoes conflict, become a witness of the journey, a symbol of the both trials he has endured and the ethical clarity and maintain the despite chaos. Aiden's experience, having been immersed in both tensions and the profound moral stakes that define to the story. The closing moments are cinematic and emotionally resonant. Rambo poses at the edge of the story, Forrest looking toward the heroism with a mixture of relief, reflection, and the quiet intensity. His journey has tested physical skill, ethical judgment, and the psychological resilience. Every choice, every calculated minute, every act of the restraint has brought him to his point, a survival not only a body but its consequences, taught man, distant voices echo one final time of the reminder, mentorship's loyalty, and the enduring moral code of the guidance and narrative form of finish. The film concludes with a synthesis of the action, introspections, and thematic revelations. Rambo emerges as a complex figure, a master of survival. Rambo emerged as a complex figure, a master of survival, a parent of ethical restraint, and a man of navigating trauma and consequences with profound skill and awareness. The narrative leaves the audience with both exhalations and the contemplations, a cinematic journey that behind the suspense, psychological depth, moral reflection, and narrative satisfactions into a choices unforgettable conclusion. The forest falls silent, the pursuit, and the Rambo ever malignant yet morally centered stands as a testament to the fusion of skill, consequences, and human resistance of fire, both mythic and the deeply human, living and enduring impressions that resonate for the beyond the final frame.